The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on Naval Air Station Fallon as Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black SUV that had brought her from the airfield. Her flight suit was pristine despite the 14-hour journey from Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where she had been finishing up a classified assignment that would never appear in any official records. At 28, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had stared death in the face more times than most people her age had changed jobs. The base buzzed with its usual afternoon activity. F-18 Super Hornets roared overhead in training formations while ground crews worked tirelessly to maintain the million-dollar aircraft that were the backbone of American naval aviation. Sarah pulled her helmet bag over her shoulder and began walking toward the operations building, her destination clear in her mind. She had been summoned here by Admiral Patricia Kellerman, one of the few women to achieve flag rank in naval aviation, for what the encrypted message had described only as urgent consultation required. What Sarah didn't notice was Admiral Marcus Richardson watching her from the window of his office on the second floor of the administration building. Richardson had been commanding officer of NAS Fallon for 18 months, and, in that time, he had built a reputation as a no-nonsense leader who demanded excellence and maintained strict discipline. At 52, he was old-school Navy, having earned his wings in an era when female pilots were still fighting for acceptance in combat roles. From his vantage point, Richardson saw what appeared to be a young pilot, probably fresh out of flight school, walking across his base with what he interpreted as casual disregard for protocol. Her relaxed stride and the way she carried her gear struck him as unprofessional. In his experience, junior officers needed to understand the importance of military bearing from day one, and someone needed to teach this pilot a lesson about respect. Richardson straightened his uniform and headed for the door. His aide, Lieutenant Commander James Torres, looked up from his desk as the Admiral strode past. "Sir, your 3 o'clock meeting with the training squadron commanders, this will only take a minute, Torres," Richardson replied curtly. "Some things can't wait." Meanwhile, Sarah continued her walk across the tarmac, unaware of the approaching confrontation. Her mind was focused on the mission briefing she would soon receive from Admiral Kellerman. The encrypted communication had been unusually vague, mentioning only that her specific skill set was required for an operation that could not be discussed over normal channels. Given her track record, Sarah suspected it involved either hostage rescue or personnel recovery in hostile territory, the kind of missions that had earned her the call sign that was both her pride and her burden. The call sign Phoenix hadn't been given lightly. It had been earned during her third deployment to Afghanistan, when her F-22 Raptor had taken critical damage during a rescue operation. With her aircraft literally falling apart around her, she had managed to extract a team of pinned-down Rangers while engaging 3 enemy fighters. The fact that she had brought her damaged bird home and landed it safely had been miraculous enough to earn comparison to the mythical bird that rose from its own ashes. But Phoenix meant more than just that one mission. Over her 6-year career, Sarah had developed a reputation for pulling off the impossible, for finding ways to complete missions that others had written off as hopeless. She had a talent for adaptive thinking under pressure that had caught the attention of the highest levels of command. Her personnel file, if anyone with sufficient clearance were to read it, contained commendations from 3 different theater commanders and a list of successful operations that read like something from a military thriller novel. As she approached the operations building, Sarah noticed the administrative complex to her right and saw a figure in dress whites emerging from the main entrance. The gold stripes on his sleeves immediately identified him as a senior officer, and years of military conditioning caused her to adjust her posture slightly, though she maintained her purposeful stride toward her destination. Admiral Richardson had covered the distance quickly, his own military bearing evident in every step. As he drew closer to the walking pilot, he began to form his words carefully. In his mind, this was a teachable moment, an opportunity to reinforce proper military decorum while demonstrating to his staff that standards would be maintained regardless of rank or circumstances. "Excuse me, Captain," Richardson called out when he was still 20 feet away. The authority in his voice was unmistakable, designed to command immediate attention and compliance. Sarah stopped and turned toward the source of the voice, immediately recognizing the rank and authority of the approaching officer. Her training took over as she faced him squarely, her posture straightening to full attention despite not yet knowing the nature of the encounter. "Yes, sir," she responded, her voice clear and professional. Richardson closed the remaining distance between them, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. The flight suit was properly fitted, he had to admit, and her gear appeared to be well maintained. But there was something about her casual confidence that continued to irritate him. Junior officers should show more obvious deference when addressed by flag rank officers. "I'm Admiral Richardson, commanding officer of this base," he began, his tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I couldn't help but notice your rather informal approach to military bearing as you walked across my installation." Sarah's expression remained neutral, though inwardly she was surprised by the nature of the confrontation. In her experience, most senior officers who didn't recognize her either ignored her completely or treated her with the professional courtesy due her rank. This direct challenge was unusual, but not entirely unexpected given the environment of a training base where discipline and protocol were paramount. "I apologize if my bearing appeared inappropriate, sir," Sarah replied diplomatically. "I was proceeding directly to the operations building as ordered." Richardson studied her face, noting the lack of defensiveness in her response but interpreting her calm demeanor as continued disrespect. In his mind, a junior officer being corrected by a base commander should show more obvious concern about the criticism. "As ordered by whom, Captain?" Richardson pressed. "I wasn't aware of any visiting pilots scheduled for today's operations." This was where the conversation began to move into dangerous territory, though neither participant fully understood it yet. Sarah's presence on the base had been arranged through channels that existed well above Admiral Richardson's level of command authority. The mission planning that had brought her to Fallon involved joint operations between multiple service branches and had been coordinated by the Pentagon's Special Operations Command. "I have orders to report to Admiral Kellerman for operational briefing, sir," Sarah explained, maintaining her professional tone while providing the minimum information necessary to answer the question. Richardson's frown deepened. Admiral Kellerman was indeed stationed at Fallon, serving as commanding officer of the Navy's Elite Strike Fighter Weapons School, commonly known as Top Gun. But Richardson was unaware of any special operations requiring outside pilots, and the apparent lack of coordination through his office struck him as a serious breach of protocol. "I see," Richardson said slowly, his tone growing more stern. "And you are?" "Captain Sarah Mitchell, sir." The name meant nothing to Admiral Richardson, which in his mind confirmed his assessment of the situation. In his experience, pilots with significant reputations were known quantities within the naval aviation community. If he hadn't heard of this Captain Mitchell, she was likely a relatively junior officer with minimal operational experience. "Captain Mitchell," Richardson continued, "let me be very clear about something. This is my base, and, while you're here, you'll conduct yourself according to my standards of military professionalism. I don't know what kind of casual approach to discipline you've experienced elsewhere, but here we maintain proper military bearing at all times." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, not fear, but the controlled tension that came from being underestimated. She had experienced this kind of prejudgment before, though usually not quite so directly from such a senior officer. The assumptions being made about her based on her appearance and perceived youth were nothing new, but they never stopped being frustrating. "Understood, sir," she replied simply, choosing not to escalate the situation unnecessarily. But Richardson wasn't finished. Having committed to this course of action, he felt compelled to drive home his point. In his mind, maintaining discipline meant following through completely, ensuring that the lesson was thoroughly understood. "Furthermore," he continued, "I want to make it clear that any pilot operating from this base will coordinate through my office. I don't care who you think you have orders from, proper chain of command will be respected." This statement crossed a line that Richardson didn't realize existed. Sarah's orders came from levels of command that superseded base operations entirely, involving national security matters that couldn't be subject to local administrative preferences. But explaining this would require revealing information that was currently classified above Richardson's clearance level. "Sir, I believe Admiral Kellerman is expecting me," Sarah said carefully, trying to find a diplomatic way to end the confrontation without compromising operational security. "Admiral Kellerman can expect whoever she wants," Richardson snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. "But no pilot flies from my base without my authorization, period." The situation had now evolved from a simple misunderstanding into a direct challenge to Sarah's mission authority. What Admiral Richardson didn't understand was that the young woman standing before him had been personally selected for this assignment by the Chief of Naval Operations himself, based on a track record of success in the most demanding operational environments the modern military could produce. "Admiral Richardson," Sarah said, her voice remaining level despite the increasing tension, "I respectfully suggest that you contact Admiral Kellerman's office to verify my orders before proceeding further." Richardson interpreted this suggestion as continued insubordination. In his view, a junior officer being corrected by a base commander shouldn't be offering suggestions about how to handle the situation. The proper response should be immediate acknowledgement of error and visible contrition. "Captain Mitchell," Richardson said, his voice rising slightly, "you seem to be laboring under the misconception that you're in a position to make suggestions here. You're not." At this point, the confrontation had attracted the attention of several personnel working in the immediate area. Ground crew members and support staff had begun to notice the tense exchange between the base commander and the unknown pilot. Word was already beginning to spread through the informal communication networks that existed on every military installation. Unknown to either Sarah or Admiral Richardson, one of the witnesses to their confrontation was Senior Chief Petty Officer Mike Razor Rodriguez, a former Navy SEAL who now served as Senior Enlisted Advisor for the base's security operations. Rodriguez had been walking from the maintenance hangar to the administrative building when he noticed the heated discussion taking place near the operations center. As Rodriguez drew closer, he began to make out the details of the conversation. When he heard Admiral Richardson address the pilot as Captain Mitchell, something clicked in his memory. The name was familiar, though it took him a moment to place it in the correct context. Then, he heard it clearly: Admiral Richardson demanding to know the pilot's call sign as part of his continued assertion of authority over the situation. "What's your call sign, Captain?" Richardson demanded. "I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with here." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Her call sign was well known within certain circles of the military community, particularly among special operations personnel. She knew that revealing it might dramatically change the nature of this confrontation, but she also understood that Admiral Richardson's continued challenges were beginning to interfere with her mission timeline. "Phoenix, sir," she replied quietly. The effect was immediate and electric. Senior Chief Rodriguez stopped dead in his tracks 20 feet away, his eyes widening as he stared at the pilot he had initially dismissed as just another young officer. The name Phoenix was legendary within the special operations community, a pilot whose reputation for impossible rescues and death-defying missions had become the stuff of briefing room folklore. Rodriguez had never met Phoenix personally, but he had heard the stories. Every SEAL, every Ranger, every special operations warrior knew about the F-22 pilot who had pulled teams out of situations that should have been impossible to survive. She was the pilot you requested when everything had gone wrong and traditional extraction methods were no longer viable. But Admiral Richardson still didn't understand the significance of what he had just heard. The call sign meant nothing to him, which in his mind confirmed his belief that he was dealing with an inexperienced pilot trying to use mysterious credentials to avoid accountability. "Phoenix," Richardson repeated skeptically. "Very dramatic. I suppose that's meant to impress me somehow?" Rodriguez realized he had to intervene before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Admiral Richardson was unknowingly insulting one of the most respected pilots in the entire military, someone whose reputation extended far beyond normal naval aviation channels. As Rodriguez began walking quickly toward the confrontation, ready to provide context that might prevent a career-ending mistake, neither Sarah nor Admiral Richardson noticed his approach. They were locked in their battle of wills, each operating from completely different sets of assumptions about the other's credibility and authority. The stage was set for a revelation that would transform Admiral Richardson's understanding of military excellence and remind him that respect in the armed forces is earned through action, not assumed through rank. But, first, the confrontation would have to reach its breaking point, with consequences that would ripple through the command structure and change how everyone involved understood the true meaning of heroism under fire. Senior Chief Rodriguez approached the confrontation with the measured urgency of a man who understood exactly how catastrophic this misunderstanding could become. In his 22 years of military service, he had witnessed plenty of situations where rank and protocol clashed with operational reality, but this was potentially the most dangerous he had ever encountered. Admiral Richardson was not just challenging any pilot, he was unknowingly insulting a living legend whose reputation was built on missions that most people would never even know had taken place. "Admiral Richardson, sir," Rodriguez called out as he closed the final distance between them. Both Sarah and the Admiral turned toward the approaching senior chief, though their reactions were markedly different. Richardson showed mild irritation at the interruption, while Sarah recognized the tactical awareness in Rodriguez's eyes that marked him as former Special Operations. "What is it, Senior Chief?" Richardson asked curtly, clearly annoyed at having his disciplinary action interrupted by enlisted personnel. Rodriguez came to attention before speaking, but his words were carefully chosen to provide maximum impact. "Sir, I believe there may be some confusion about Captain Mitchell's credentials. With your permission, I'd like to provide some context that might be relevant to this situation." Richardson's frown deepened. The suggestion that he lacked context about anything happening on his own base was not something he was prepared to accept gracefully. "Senior Chief Rodriguez, I'm perfectly capable of handling personnel matters without enlisted input." But Rodriguez had committed to this course of action, understanding that his intervention might be the only thing preventing a massive embarrassment for the Admiral and potentially damaging the reputation of the base itself. "Sir, Captain Mitchell's call sign Phoenix is well known within the Special Operations community. She has conducted multiple high-risk extraction missions that have saved the lives of numerous Special Operations personnel." Sarah remained silent during this exchange, recognizing that Rodriguez was attempting to defuse the situation diplomatically while providing Admiral Richardson with a face-saving opportunity to reconsider his approach. Her training in classified operations had taught her the value of allowing others to provide context when direct explanation might compromise mission security. Admiral Richardson, however, interpreted Rodriguez's intervention as insubordination and a challenge to his authority. "Senior Chief, you are out of line. I don't need fairy tales about call signs to handle a simple matter of military discipline." It was at this moment that Rodriguez made a decision that would define the rest of the confrontation. Rather than continue with diplomatic suggestions, he chose to provide specific information that would force Admiral Richardson to confront the reality of who he was dealing with. "Sir, Captain Mitchell was the pilot who conducted Operation Silver Phoenix in Afghanistan 18 months ago. She extracted a 12-man SEAL team that had been pinned down by superior forces for 6 hours. The mission was considered impossible due to terrain and enemy fire concentration, but Phoenix brought her F-22 into a canyon barely wider than her wingspan and provided cover while hovering in position for the extraction." The details of the mission that Rodriguez was describing had never been fully declassified, but enough information had filtered through the Special Operations community to make Phoenix a legendary figure among those who understood what such a rescue actually required. What Rodriguez was describing wasn't just difficult, it was a feat of piloting skill and courage that bordered on the impossible. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and discomfort as Rodriguez revealed details of one of her most challenging missions. While she appreciated his attempt to provide context, she was also aware that discussing classified operations in this setting was inappropriate, even if the broad details had become somewhat known within certain military circles. But Admiral Richardson was still not processing the significance of what he was hearing. His focus remained on what he perceived as a continued challenge to his authority, rather than on the substance of the information being provided. "Senior Chief, regardless of whatever stories you may have heard, the fact remains that this pilot has shown disrespect for base protocol and needs to understand the importance of proper military bearing." Rodriguez realized that subtle approach was not working. Admiral Richardson was so committed to his initial assessment that he was unable to process information that contradicted his assumptions. The senior chief decided that more direct action was necessary. "Sir, with respect, I believe you should contact the Pentagon Special Operations Command before proceeding further with this matter. Captain Mitchell's operations are classified at levels that require specific authorization to discuss." This statement finally penetrated Admiral Richardson's determination to maintain control of the situation. The mention of Pentagon-level classification and Special Operations Command suggested that there might be factors at play that he was not aware of. But, rather than causing him to reconsider his approach, it made him more suspicious about what he saw as an attempt to use mysterious credentials to avoid accountability. "Captain Mitchell," Richardson said, turning his attention back to Sarah, "If you have legitimate orders from Special Operations Command, you should have presented them immediately instead of allowing this situation to develop." Sarah understood that she was being put in an impossible position. Her actual orders were classified above Admiral Richardson's clearance level, which meant she could not provide the documentation he was demanding without violating security protocols. At the same time, his continued challenges were beginning to interfere with her mission timeline. "Sir, my orders are classified. I was instructed to report directly to Admiral Kellerman for briefing. The nature of my mission does not permit discussion of details with personnel who are not specifically cleared for the operation." To Admiral Richardson, this response sounded like exactly the kind of evasive behavior he expected from someone trying to avoid accountability. In his experience, legitimate orders came through proper channels and could be verified through normal command procedures. "Captain Mitchell, that's not how military operations work. There are no orders so classified that they can't be verified through appropriate command channels." This statement revealed the fundamental limitation of Admiral Richardson's understanding. While his experience in naval aviation was extensive, he had never been involved in the level of special operations where compartmentalized security protocols meant that even flag rank officers could be excluded from operational details based on need-to-know principles. Rodriguez decided that one more attempt at intervention was necessary, this time with information that would be impossible for Admiral Richardson to dismiss. "Admiral, sir, perhaps we should contact Admiral Kellerman's office to verify Captain Mitchell's appointment. I believe she's expecting Captain Mitchell for an operational briefing scheduled for 1500 hours. The mention of a specific time and Admiral Kellerman's direct involvement finally caused Richardson to pause in his relentless pursuit of what he saw as disciplinary action. Admiral Patricia Kellerman was a flag officer whose reputation was beyond question, and if she was indeed expecting this pilot for an operational briefing, it suggested that there were factors involved that Richardson might not be aware of. But before Richardson could respond to Rodriguez's suggestion, the situation was dramatically altered by the appearance of two more figures approaching from the direction of the Special Operations Training Facility located in the restricted section of the base. The first was Master Sergeant David Bulldog Patterson, a Force Reconnaissance Marine who served as liaison between the base and various Special Operations training programs. The second was Lieutenant Commander Jessica Viper Chen, an F-18 pilot who had recently returned from a deployment where she had worked closely with Special Operations Forces. Both of these individuals had been alerted to the confrontation taking place near the operations building by the informal communication networks that existed among Special Operations personnel. When they heard that someone called Phoenix was involved in a dispute with Base Command, they had immediately understood the potential for disaster. "Phoenix?" Master Sergeant Patterson called out as he approached the group. "Captain Sarah Mitchell?" Sarah turned toward Patterson, recognizing him as someone she had worked with during previous joint operations training exercises. "Hello, Bulldog. Good to see you again." The casual familiarity between Sarah and Patterson was immediately obvious to everyone present. This was not the interaction between strangers, but the greeting between professionals who had worked together in demanding operational environments. "What brings you to Fallon, Phoenix?" Patterson asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "Classified briefing with Admiral Kellerman," Sarah replied simply. Lieutenant Commander Chen had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. She had heard stories about Phoenix for years but had never had the opportunity to meet the legendary pilot in person. "You're Phoenix?" Chen asked, her voice filled with obvious respect. "The Phoenix who pulled Alpha Team out of the Kunar province when everyone thought they were lost?" Sarah nodded modestly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention her reputation was drawing. "That was a joint operation. I couldn't have succeeded without ground support coordination." Admiral Richardson found himself witnessing an interaction that was completely contrary to his expectations. The obvious respect and familiarity that these Special Operations personnel showed toward Captain Mitchell suggested that her reputation was not based on exaggerated stories or unearned credentials. Patterson turned toward Admiral Richardson, his expression carefully neutral but his tone carrying the authority of someone who had commanded men in combat. "Sir, if I may, Captain Mitchell has one of the most distinguished service records in modern naval aviation." Her rescue operations have saved the lives of more than 60 special operations personnel in the past 3 years alone. The number hit Admiral Richardson like a physical blow. 60 lives saved was not a minor accomplishment, it represented multiple successful missions in the most dangerous possible circumstances. Even if Patterson was exaggerating, the magnitude suggested that Captain Mitchell's reputation was based on substantial operational success. Lieutenant Commander Chen added her own perspective. Admiral, Phoenix is requested by name for the most difficult extraction missions. When conventional rescue methods won't work, she's the pilot who finds a way to make the impossible happen. Rodriguez, seeing that the tide of the conversation was finally beginning to shift in the right direction, provided one more piece of context. Sir, the reason her call sign is Phoenix is because she has a reputation for bringing people back from situations where everyone else had given up hope. She rises from the ashes of impossible circumstances. Admiral Richardson stood in the center of this group of military professionals, all of whom were providing consistent testimony about Captain Mitchell's exceptional qualifications and reputation. The weight of their combined credibility was beginning to force him to confront the possibility that his initial assessment had been completely wrong. But the most dramatic moment was yet to come. As the group continued their discussion, a black sedan with government plates pulled up near the operations building. The passenger door opened, and Admiral Patricia Kellerman herself stepped out, her expression suggesting that she was aware of the delay in Captain Mitchell's scheduled arrival. Admiral Kellerman was a formidable figure in naval aviation, one of the first women to command a carrier air wing and a pilot whose own combat record was legendary. When she walked toward the group gathered around Captain Mitchell, her presence immediately commanded attention from everyone present. "Captain Mitchell," Admiral Kellerman said as she approached, "I trust there's a good reason why you're 15 minutes late for our scheduled briefing?" The question was pointed but not accusatory, suggesting that Admiral Kellerman understood that delays in military operations were usually caused by circumstances rather than negligence. Sarah came to attention before responding. "My apologies, ma'am. There was a misunderstanding about protocols that required clarification." Admiral Kellerman's eyes swept the group, taking in Admiral Richardson's obvious discomfort, the presence of multiple special operations personnel, and the general tension that pervaded the entire gathering. "I see," Admiral Kellerman said slowly. "Admiral Richardson, I assume you've been properly introduced to Captain Mitchell?" The question contained layers of meaning that Admiral Richardson was only beginning to understand. The fact that Admiral Kellerman knew him by name suggested that Captain Mitchell's arrival had been coordinated at levels above his immediate awareness, and the tone of the question implied that proper introductions should have included relevant information about Captain Mitchell's qualifications. "Admiral Kellerman," Richardson began carefully, "I was ensuring that proper base protocols were being followed." Admiral Kellerman nodded thoughtfully. "Of course. Protocol is important. I trust you've had the opportunity to review Captain Mitchell's service record and operational credentials?" This question exposed the fundamental problem with Admiral Richardson's approach. He had made assumptions about Captain Mitchell based on superficial observations rather than taking the time to understand who he was actually dealing with. The suggestion that he should have reviewed her credentials before challenging her authority was both obvious and embarrassing. "I was not aware that Captain Mitchell's credentials required special review," Richardson admitted reluctantly. Admiral Kellerman's expression remained professionally neutral, but her next words carried the weight of flag-rank authority. "Admiral Richardson, Captain Mitchell has been personally selected for this mission by the Chief of Naval Operations. Her operational record includes successful completion of 17 high-risk extraction missions with 0 casualties. She holds top-secret clearance with special access protocols, and her tactical expertise in hostile territory operations is considered among the best in the service." Each detail that Admiral Kellerman provided hit Admiral Richardson like a separate revelation. Personal selection by the CNO indicated the highest possible level of command interest. 17 successful missions with 0 casualties was a record that spoke to exceptional skill and judgment. Top-secret clearance with special access meant that her operations involved national security matters at the highest classification levels. Master Sergeant Patterson decided to add one final piece of context that would complete Admiral Richardson's education about exactly who he had been challenging. "Sir, Phoenix is the pilot who rescued my team in Syria last year. When our extraction helicopter was shot down, she brought her F-22 into an area that was supposed to be impossible to navigate and held off enemy forces for 40 minutes while we waited for backup extraction. Every man in my unit owes his life to her skill and courage. The personal testimony from Patterson, delivered with the quiet intensity of someone who had been there and lived through the experience, provided the most powerful possible endorsement of Captain Mitchell's capabilities. This was not theoretical praise based on reports and paperwork, this was the gratitude of a warrior who had been saved by her actions. Admiral Richardson found himself in the uncomfortable position of realizing that he had spent the past 20 minutes challenging and insulting one of the most distinguished pilots in the entire military. The woman he had dismissed as an inexperienced junior officer was actually a combat veteran whose reputation was built on consistently achieving the impossible under the most dangerous circumstances. The recognition of his mistake was both humbling and deeply embarrassing. He had allowed his assumptions about age and appearance to override his professional judgment, creating a situation that reflected poorly on his leadership and understanding of the personnel under his command. Admiral Kellerman, recognizing the need to move past the misunderstanding and focus on operational priorities, took control of the situation with the efficiency that had made her one of the most respected leaders in naval aviation. Captain Mitchell, we have significant ground to cover in our briefing. If you're ready, we should proceed immediately. Sarah nodded crisply. Ready, ma'am. As Admiral Kellerman and Captain Mitchell began walking toward the operations building, the group of special operations personnel began to disperse, their mission of providing context and preventing further misunderstanding accomplished. Admiral Richardson stood alone on the tarmac, watching Phoenix walk away and understanding for the first time that he had just encountered military excellence in its purest form, not the kind found in textbooks or training manuals, but the kind forged in combat and proven through impossible circumstances. The lesson he had intended to teach had become a lesson he would never forget. The operations building at Naval Air Station Fallon was a fortress of classified information, containing briefing rooms equipped with the most advanced secure communication systems available to the military. As Admiral Kellerman led Captain Mitchell through the security checkpoints and biometric scanners that guarded access to the most sensitive areas, neither woman spoke about the confrontation that had just taken place. Both understood that operational priorities took precedence over personal disputes, regardless of how uncomfortable those disputes might have been. The briefing room they entered was designated for top-secret discussions, with walls lined with copper mesh to prevent electronic surveillance and multiple layers of access control that ensured only those with proper clearance could enter. Admiral Kellerman activated the room's secure status, triggering systems that would prevent any unauthorized recording or transmission of the information that was about to be discussed. Before we begin, Admiral Kellerman said as she took her seat at the head of the conference table, I want to apologize for the confusion you encountered with Admiral Richardson. The nature of your assignment requires a level of operational security that doesn't always interface smoothly with normal base protocols. Sarah settled into her chair, her expression professional and focused. No apology necessary, ma'am. Operational security sometimes creates communication challenges. I understand Admiral Richardson was acting according to his understanding of proper procedures. Admiral Kellerman nodded, appreciating Sarah's diplomatic response while privately noting the grace with which Phoenix handled an obviously uncomfortable situation. This kind of emotional resilience was exactly what made certain pilots suitable for the most demanding special operations missions. Captain Mitchell, Admiral Kellerman began, what I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels of national security. The mission we're discussing has been designated as critical to American strategic interests, and failure is not an option that has been seriously considered by the Planning Committee. Sarah straightened slightly in her chair, recognizing the tone that preceded mission briefings where the stakes were measured in lives rather than simply strategic objectives. In her experience, when senior officers began with statements about failure not being an option, the missions that followed usually required the kind of impossible flying that had earned her the Phoenix call sign. Admiral Kellerman activated the room's main display screen, which immediately showed a satellite image of mountainous terrain that Sarah didn't immediately recognize. The landscape was harsh and forbidding, with peaks that rose sharply from narrow valleys and terrain that would challenge even the most skilled pilots. This is the Wakhan Corridor in northeastern Afghanistan, Admiral Kellerman explained, using a laser pointer to highlight specific geographical features. It's one of the most remote and difficult to access areas in the world, with elevations reaching over 14,000 feet and weather conditions that can change from clear to impossible in minutes. Sarah studied the satellite imagery, automatically analyzing the terrain from a pilot's perspective. The valleys were narrow, the peaks were jagged, and the entire region looked like something designed specifically to make aviation operations as dangerous as possible. 3 days ago, Admiral Kellerman continued, a joint CIA Special Forces reconnaissance team was inserted into this region to investigate reports of a new terrorist training facility being established in caves that had previously been used by Al-Qaeda leadership. The team consisted of 8 personnel, 4 special operations soldiers and 4 intelligence specialists. The Admiral changed the display to show personnel files for the missing team. Sarah found herself looking at photographs of 8 individuals whose ages ranged from 25 to 38, all of whom had the lean, hard look of people who made their living in the world's most dangerous places. 36 hours ago, we lost contact with the team. Their last communication indicated that they had located the facility and were conducting surveillance, but that they had reason to believe their presence had been detected by hostile forces. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that came with mission briefings involving personnel recovery. Every pilot who flew special operations understood that behind every lost contact report were real people whose lives hung in the balance, whose families were waiting for word that might never come. Satellite surveillance has confirmed that the team is surrounded by approximately 40 to 50 enemy fighters who have positioned themselves to prevent any conventional extraction, Admiral Kellerman continued. The terrain makes helicopter operations extremely hazardous, and the concentration of enemy forces means that any rescue attempt using normal methods would likely result in significant casualties among both the trap team and the rescue force. The display changed again, this time showing tactical analysis of the enemy positions. Sarah could see that the terrorists had effectively created a siege situation, using the terrain to their advantage while preventing any easy access routes for rescue operations. This is where your specific qualifications become critical, Admiral Kellerman said, her tone shifting to reflect the absolute seriousness of what she was about to request. The Joint Chiefs have determined that the only viable rescue option is an operation that would require an F-22 pilot capable of precision flying in extreme terrain conditions while providing close air support in a situation where the margin for error is essentially zero. Sarah understood immediately why she had been selected for this mission. The walk-in corridor represented exactly the kind of impossible flying conditions that had defined her career, terrain that was too dangerous for conventional aircraft, enemy concentrations that required surgical precision, and trapped personnel whose survival depended on someone being willing to attempt what others had declared impossible. "What's the extraction plan?" Sarah asked, her mind already beginning to process the tactical challenges involved in operating an F-22 in the conditions Admiral Kellerman had described. Admiral Kellerman activated a new display that showed detailed mission planning documents. The operation has been designated as Phoenix Recovery, which should give you some indication of in the world of elite military aviation, respect isn't given, it's earned through blood, sweat, and split-second decisions at 30,000 feet. Call signs aren't just nicknames, they're battle-tested identities that carry the weight of every mission, every save, every impossible victory snatched from the jaws of defeat. When Admiral Richardson saw the young woman walking across his naval air base in a flight suit, he made the kind of snap judgment that would haunt him for years. What he didn't know was that the pilot he was about to humiliate carried a call sign that would make the most hardened Navy SEALs stop dead in their tracks, a name whispered with reverence in the darkest corners of classified operations. Sometimes the most dangerous mistake isn't the one you make in combat. Sometimes it's the one you make when you underestimate the warrior standing right in front of you. This is the story of Captain Sarah Phoenix Mitchell, and the day one Admiral learned that legends don't always look like what you expect.